deep in the earth of Montana. A child's grave held the power to shatter history. This wasn't just about old bones, it was about a genetic bombshell. When scientists finally decoded the DNA from this 12,900-year-old infant, they uncovered a truth so profound it made textbooks obsolete overnight. A single mysterious source for all of America's indigenous peoples was one thing, but you won't believe where that genetic trail ultimately led, or what it says about how fast they conquered a continent. It's a story that is, to put it mildly, unbelievable. The child who held the key. In 1968, on a chilly day in southern Montana, two construction workers were digging for sandstone at the base of a rocky outcrop. They weren't looking for anything special, just doing their job. But their equipment soon hit something unusual. Buried a mere 6 feet beneath the surface were the fragile remains of a human child. You see, this discovery could have easily been dismissed or lost to time. Instead, it became the single most important clue in solving the greatest mystery of American prehistory. Who were the first Americans, and where did they come from? The site, known today as the Anzac Site, was unlike anything seen before. The bones belonged to a little boy, somewhere between 1 and 2 years old, but it was what he was buried with that left archaeologists stunned. He was surrounded by more than 100 ancient tools, all exquisitely crafted from stone and antler. These weren't just simple arrowheads, they were spear points, bifaces and specialized tools made in a very distinct style. Scientists immediately recognized them as belonging to the Clovis people, a culture long believed to be the first to populate North America. The artifacts themselves were a treasure trove, the largest collection of Clovis tools ever found in one place. But there was something else, something deeply personal and mysterious about this burial. The child's bones and the tools were all coated in a thick layer of brilliant red ochre, a type of powdered iron ore. We're talking about a massive amount. Over 30 pounds of it had been carefully sprinkled over the boy. In ancient cultures, red ochre was a sacred material, often symbolizing life, blood, and rebirth. This wasn't just a simple burial. It was a deeply spiritual ceremony. Someone, nearly 13,000 years ago, had loved this child enough to give him one of the most elaborate send-offs imaginable. The thing nobody tells you is that this act of love would end up sending a ripple through time, allowing modern science to answer questions those ancient people could never have dreamed of. For decades, the Anzac child, as he came to be known, was an important but frustrating puzzle piece. The artifacts confirmed that the Clovis people were in Montana around 12,900 years ago. They were expert hunters, capable of taking down mammoths and other megafauna with their signature fluted spear points. Many people are crazy about the Clovis first theory, which argued that these big game hunters were the first and only wave of migration into the Americas. But not all things are what they seem. There were nagging questions. Where did the Clovis people come from, and how did they manage to spread across 2 entire continents from Canada to Chile in what seemed like the blink of an eye? The bones of the Anzac child held the answers, but for 40 years, the technology to read them simply didn't exist. The skeleton sat in a museum, a silent witness to a lost world. Scientists knew it was important, but they had no idea it contained a genetic blueprint that would completely shatter everything they thought they knew. This child wasn't just a member of the Clovis culture. He was about to become their messenger to the future. But unlocking that message was a challenge that bordered on impossible. The DNA was ancient and shattered. The shocking truth in the DNA. By the early 2000s, a new scientific field was exploding: ancient DNA analysis. Scientists were now able to extract tiny, fragmented pieces of genetic material from long-dead organisms and piece them back together. To put it mildly, this was a game changer. Suddenly, they had a time machine that could look directly into the biology of the past. A team of international researchers, led by the renowned Danish geneticist Esko Willerslev, turned their attention to the Anzac child. They knew that if they could sequence his genome, they wouldn't just be studying one individual. They would be looking at a snapshot of the entire founding population of the Americas. The process was incredibly delicate. Extracting DNA from bones that are nearly 13 millennia old is no easy task. The DNA is broken down into millions of tiny pieces, and it's heavily contaminated with genetic material from soil bacteria and even the people who have handled the bones over the years. What many overlooked is the sheer difficulty of this task. It's like trying to reassemble a single shredded book from a library that has been through an earthquake and a flood. But using cutting-edge technology, the team painstakingly isolated the boy's authentic DNA and began to read his genetic code. When the results finally came in, they were staggering. The first thing the team confirmed was the boy's ancestry. His DNA showed he was unequivocally related to ancient people from Siberia. This slammed the door on some wilder theories, like the Solitrian hypothesis, which claimed the first Americans were actually ancient Europeans who crossed the Atlantic. The Anzac child proved once and for all that the ancestors of Native Americans came from Asia across the Bering Land Bridge that once connected Siberia and Alaska. This was a huge confirmation, but it wasn't the biggest surprise. The real bombshell was yet to come. The team then compared the Anzac child's genome to the DNA of modern indigenous people. This is where the story went from an academic paper to a headline that rewrote history. They found that the Anzac child's DNA was more closely related to all modern Native Americans than to any other population on Earth. From the Cree in Canada to the Maya in Mexico, and all the way down to the Mapuche in Chile. Every indigenous person sampled shared a direct, undeniable genetic link with this one little boy from Montana. In fact, scientists estimated that a staggering 80% of all Native people in the Americas, North, Central, and South, are direct descendants of the Anzac child's immediate family, his clan. The remaining 20% were still more closely related to him than anyone else. This was unbelievable. It meant that the Clovis people weren't just one of the first groups in the Americas. They were the direct ancestors of almost everyone. They were, in essence, the founding fathers of an entire hemisphere. The boy's specific mitochondrial DNA, a lineage called D4H3A, is so rare today that it's found in less than 1% of Native Americans. Yet its presence in his ancient genome proved it was a founding lineage, one that traveled south and branched out into hundreds of nations and tribes. The Anzac child wasn't just a member of a lost culture. He was a direct ancestor, a great-great-grandfather thousands of times over, to millions of people alive today. The discovery painted a new, breathtaking picture of a single, unified migration that swept through the continents. But this revelation raised an even bigger question. How did one group of people accomplish such a feat? A single family takes a hemisphere. The Anzac child's DNA didn't just connect the dots. It redrew the entire map of the past. The core message was clear and undeniable. The Americas were not populated by multiple separate waves of different peoples over tens of thousands of years, as some had argued. Instead, they were populated by a single founding group, the ancestors of the Anzac child, who moved south from the Bering Land Bridge with incredible speed. This group split into two main branches. One would become the ancestors of peoples like the Athabascans in the north. The other, the Anzac child's branch, would go on to populate the rest of North and all of South America. This completely upended the Clovis first model. You see, that theory wasn't entirely wrong, but it was incomplete. The Clovis people were the first widespread culture, but the DNA showed they were not a static group that simply hunted mammoths in North America. They were part of a massive, dynamic expansion. The genetic data suggests that after crossing into America, this founding population paused for a few thousand years in Beringia, the land that is now underwater between Alaska and Siberia. During this Beringian standstill, their DNA became unique. Then, somewhere around 15,000 years ago, the ice sheets that covered Canada began to melt, opening up a corridor to the south, and they poured through it. The speed of their expansion is, to put it mildly, one of the most incredible wow factors in human history. Archaeological and genetic evidence now suggests that within just 1,000 to 2,000 years, these people had spread from Alaska to the southern tip of Chile, a journey of over 10,000 miles. Think about that. That's a rate of expansion of at least 5 to 10 miles every single year through unknown territory filled with massive predators and a completely alien landscape. They were master explorers and adapters, colonizing two continents faster than any other group of humans had ever colonized new land. This discovery also helped make sense of controversial archaeological sites. For years, sites like Monteverde in Chile, which dated to over 14,500 years ago, older than any Clovis site in North America, were dismissed by many scientists. How could people be in southern Chile before they were in Texas? The Anzac genome provided the answer. The migration happened so fast that people could have reached the far south almost as soon as they were establishing themselves in the north. The first Americans didn't just walk, they ran. What many overlooked is how this single discovery settled decades of bitter academic debate. It provided a unifying theory. The different shapes of skulls found in North and South America, which some had used to argue for different founding populations, were now explained by simple genetic drift over thousands of years within a single related population. The Anzac child's DNA was the Rosetta Stone that allowed scientists to finally read the story of the past. And it was a story of one family tree with many, many branches. The science was settled, but the story of the Anzac child himself was far from over. This ancient boy had one last journey to make, a journey home that would stir a modern controversy. The legacy of Anzac I. The scientific revelations from the Anzac child's genome were a triumph, but they also raised profound ethical questions. Whose story was this to tell? For decades, scientists had studied Native American remains, often without the consent or even the knowledge of their living descendants. Many people are crazy about scientific progress, but the thing nobody tells you is the human cost. To many indigenous people, digging up and analyzing the bones of their ancestors is a deep violation of their spiritual beliefs. The Anzac child was not just a data point, he was a human being, a beloved son, an ancestor. Recognizing this, the scientific team led by Eska Willerslove knew they had to do something different. Before they even published their groundbreaking findings, they reached out to Native American tribes in the Montana area. They traveled to reservations and presented their findings to tribal elders from the Crow, Cheyenne, and other nations. They didn't just present the data, they asked for guidance. They explained what they had found, that this child was a direct ancestor to the people living in that very room. The reaction was powerful and emotional. For the tribes, this wasn't news. It was a confirmation of what their oral histories had said for centuries. Their creation stories often speak of emerging from the land, of being there since time immemorial. The science, for the first time, was aligning with their sacred traditions. Sarah Anzac, the daughter of the family on whose land the remains were found, was also deeply involved. She had been a caretaker of the bones for years and felt a deep responsibility to see them treated with respect. Together, the scientists, the Anzac family, and a coalition of Montana tribes made a historic decision. On June 28, 2014, nearly 46 years after he was discovered, the Anzac child was reburied. A ceremony was held, blending modern science with ancient tradition. Representatives from multiple tribes gathered to honor the boy. They wrapped his remains in a buffalo robe, sang traditional songs, and returned him to the earth in a secret location, ensuring he would never be disturbed again. It was a landmark moment, a new model for how science and indigenous culture could work together. The people watching this unfold saw a mystery being solved, but also a deep wound beginning to heal. Was all this happening overnight? Of course not. But for the tribes, it was proof of what they always knew. For science, it was a lesson in humility and respect. We may be missing key details of his life, but the legacy of the Anzac child is now twofold. He rewrote the history books with his DNA, but he also helped rewrite the rules for how we respectfully engage with the past. The Anzac child proved that science and tradition can tell the same story. But does science have the right to uncover secrets that ancestors intended to keep buried? Let us know below. And don't forget to like and subscribe.